I'm Andy Blackmer with Easy Drops, and I'm just going to walk you through how to do an install. For the most part, all you need is a 1/2-inch ratchet wrench and a couple other basic tools just to move some of the bracketry around that's already existing on the boom. So the first step is basically just laying out the boom, making sure you know where to put all of the drops. This machine is on 15-inch nozzle bodies. We're not going to have a drop-down center. So we'll have 2 drops, 30 inches over, 60-inch centers. So basically we're going to find center, which is this guy. And so we're 15, 30. So we'll have 1 drop right here. I prefer to just mark it all out first thing so you don't get mixed up as you go. It's easy to do. So I usually just mark with a chalk marker, and then 15, 30, 45, 60. So then you're marking every 4th drop nozzle on 15-inch spacings. The only tricky one that I wanted to point out is down here. So as you're counting your way down, be careful here because there's a hidden nozzle body on the front side. So just make sure you're counting all the nozzle bodies and then mark out your whole boom. And now we'll go work out from center. So for the convenience of time, we've already got the receivers mounted on here. And what you're gonna do here, so the receiver is this part right here that's going to stay on the boom permanently. And then these extensions pin on and off for just when you're switching back and forth. With your nozzle body here, you're just going to use the 13-inch extension, and then you bolt the peg mount onto here, onto the 9x13, so that you line up with the nozzle body. And that's what we're going to do just every single time all the way out. We're going to line the peg up with our proper position every 60 inches across the whole boom. I don't recommend using impact drivers or anything like that. It's all stainless hardware, and stainless hardware is known for galling. So it might go on, but you'll never get it off if you use an impact. So just avoid impact drivers of any kind. Even if you go easy on them, they usually will end up galling. So just use a nice ratchet wrench, O-ratchet, anything like that. So you're down, just eyeball it, line it up with your nozzle body. We're good to go. Got the receiver mounted on. Now, generally speaking, I would have already put, so you mount this on, and then you can fine tune and square this receiver up as you go through. This next one is the only tricky position really. And since we need to be mounted right here, and there's no slot cut to mount our peg or our extension right here, we need to use an offset. For this, we'll use a sub boom, the 65-inch piece of aluminum tube. There's normally a hose guide for the plumbing here that we have to just unbolt so that we can use this slot. And so you're gonna just remove that. It's overkill. So you're gonna remove that, and then we'll bolt our receiver right here on this second slot out. And then we're gonna use our extensions. This one, just put it right as close to the end as you can. You don't need to worry about the next nozzle body or anything. We're only gonna have 1 drop on here. If you're doing it by yourself, it's handy to throw the U-bolt on loosely. 1 on each side. Slide it through. Now we've already done this, but the key here is that we want to actually tighten these U-bolts up to the extensions before we tighten these receivers down. And that's so that they square to this. If you tighten these receivers up at an angle with the extension already in and then tighten this up, it'll start binding, so you might pull it off, but it won't line up when you go back on. And so we want to tighten this up, and then we tighten these receivers up last. I generally just kind of center it. Our drop is over here, so like it doesn't really matter where it is on these 30-inch row spacings. I do recommend like a nail pouch. I normally carry a belt or a tool belt or a hoodie, just because there's so many small parts that it can be really handy just to have everything at your fingertips. We're going to tighten this one up first. And then from that point, you want to make sure that it's loose, that everything's sliding in and out right there on those receivers, so that when you take it out, it doesn't spring and get all out of whack. That way, one person can still put it on and off fairly easily. Then you're just going to pin those 3/8 snap pins in the hole. I always start with the furthest out position. You can go ahead and, you know, find out down the road. Maybe you end up putting it into the closer position, closer into the boom. But you want to start as far out away from the tire as possible, just in case there's anything different about your machine. So we're going to go ahead and line it up there. The last step for position 2 here would just be simply to line up, and I just eyeball it. If you're within, realistically, if you're within 3 inches of perfect, you know, you're going to be, the drops are designed to follow the row. So within 3 inches of perfect, you're good. So just eyeball it with your nozzle body. You'd U-bolt that on there. And that's all that is for position 2. And so we might as well just move on to position 3, which is really, really easy. So position 3, we've already got the peg mount bolted on here onto the end of the extension. So we've measured over 60 inches. We're right at this nozzle body here. If you could get this angle here, if you look at the receiver, there's a notched out part so that it'll be flush with the front of the boom. That's to avoid spray pattern. And so we want to make sure that we center that notched part on the front side as close to the nozzle body, and then pushed all the way back so as to avoid getting in the way of spray pattern when you're out broadcasting. And then you're just going to pin that on, and that's that. So that's position 1. Position 2, this is 3. 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all identical. Position 7 is going to be right here at that hidden nozzle body on the other side. So position 7, the best solution is it's just a direct mount peg. When you tighten this on, when you put it on, I just always recommend just always fold carefully, make sure you're watching. If you were to put this peg in the wrong position and then fold up, there's a chance that it can actually catch and hit a nozzle body or break something very expensive. So just make sure that when you put this on, to be careful when you fold, or even just skip this one, fold up, count it back out, bolt it on when it's folded. That way you know that you're clear and you're not going to cause any damage to your boom. One last note about position 7 here at the hinge. Just make sure you don't absent-mindedly connect to the primary boom, so that when you go to fold, it wants to pull. Just make sure you're connecting to the secondary boom, so that when you fold up, there's no harm done. From there, so we'd be 15, 30, 45, 60 inches over. We're going to switch over to the other side of the boom at this point. So this is a slightly different peg mount here. This is a 2.5 inch peg mount, so it's a little bit oversized. I usually put the notch on the bottom just so that there's less crop damage as you're going through the field, but that really doesn't matter at all. If you can look up above, there is a truss support right here that it has to straddle. And so we've got the wider one so that it'll straddle. That goes just perfectly centered on that support there. And that's position 8. Position 9 is just 1.5-inch square U-bolts bolted on. Your nozzle body's on the opposite side. So we're now on the leading edge of the boom. Position 10 is the same concept, but we're gonna go down to the smaller 1-inch square U-bolts at this point. And then when we get out here to the very end, we have removable pegs. So it's the same exact concept as the last one, the smaller U-bolts, all that. Some of these booms will have your height control bracketry in the way. You just have to loosen that up, slide it. If you do have to move that, just make sure that you move them an equal amount on both sides to get it out of the way. And you can always reach out and find out the best recommended practice, but that's what we've been told. And so this is a removable peg. When you're out broadcasting, when you're out spraying, and you're not running drops, you want to pull this off, pull the hardware off, put it in a toolbox. You don't want to leave it on while you're out spraying because a tree branch can reach out and grab this and unpin it at times. But this way, if you get into a hedgerow or a fence row or something like that, they don't actually get caught and do any damage to the boom. There's pretty much nothing there. And the last position is identical to that. Position 12, you should have one nozzle body, actual 15-inch nozzle body left out beyond. All right, so this is simple enough at this point. When you go to just set, you got everything installed, you're ready to go. Just make sure you've got your 3/4-inch bushing on there first. That keeps you out away from the bolt heads and or U-bolts. Then you're gonna put that on, put the drop on, put the retainer bushing on, and that's all there is. When you go to route the hose, keep in mind where your crop rows will be. And we usually generally run it kind of around there and then over to your nozzle body. You remember you won't be hooking to the same nozzle body that you're running. So you may end up running it around, just trying to keep it out of, so that all the tassels, depending on when you're running, and so you're not abusing that hose and having it bounce all over. So just running it around in a way that it's not catching on crop. And then the last thing about the drop, basically easy drops are virtually indestructible, very well made. The only thing that can really damage them is storage. So they'll run through the field all day long and be happy. Generally, the operator should try to keep the height about a 45-degree angle up like this so that it's wearing just on the tips. If you lay it down too low, it'll wear the poly off and you'll start losing the tips. So you want to keep it a little higher than 45, ideally. And then the only other thing is, so in that storage situation where some guy just took and chucked them all into a box, don't do that. They can get, if they sit all winter like this, they'll hold that bend. And so in order to fix that, just take them and bend them back hard, hold them for 30 seconds or so, and then just evaluate. So you can kind of fine tune and tweak them. You want them to be right about 29 inches so that there's room for them to get through the field. So we're a little wide because I just did that on purpose. So now you can flex them in this way, fine tune them to anywhere 31 to 29, but right now we're dead on at 29 inches, so that's the ideal. That's kind of where you want to start with. And I recommend checking that width, every season when you get them out, just kind of dial that in and get them good to go. So then the only other thing is on 100-foot booms, on the fence, there's some added reinforcements such as this one. And so we're gonna kind of simulate that. So on a 100-foot boom where you have reinforcements in the way and you have to end up putting a drop where there's a truss going through, you're just gonna mount the receiver off to the side of that. And then once you're mounted off to the side of that, you'll use these little 14-inch pieces of aluminum square tube to create an offset so that it still drops, it extends out away from the tires, down underneath the boom when it folds, and then you just create that offset. So we need to be mounted on this in this scenario. I just put it in the wrong receiver. So we needed to be mounted on this in this scenario, so you just mount that receiver off to whatever distance you needed to be. Personally, I like to mount these all the same. So that peg to extension offset, if you can mount them all the way over on the end, that means that all of these parts are going to be universal for one side or the other. But it doesn't always work out. So it's just something to have in mind. Here, we're just going to run it up and over. Turn it on. And then the other thing is basically you're just going to go through and turn all of these halfway. Everything else that you're not connected to, you're going to turn those nozzle bodies halfway to shut them off. So the only other thing to worry about is on a 100-foot boom, you might think that you don't need an offset for position 6, even though it says you do in the instructions. That is because of the saddle. You can mount it to the boom without an offset and it works out fine. But when you go to fold up, you're going to end up in these lights up here and you might break a light, which they look very expensive. So you're going to want to just make sure to fold slowly as always and just take a look at that. Make sure you're not going to actually break one of these lights.